Now, depending on how well I've done the noise cancelling on this recording, you might hear the crickets that live in the same room as my study desk, because they're food for the pit hedgehog. You might hear them chirping. They're singing a little song for me right now as I'm recording. So if you hear them and they annoy you, I apologise. If you don't hear them, but you wanted to have, but the noise cancelling has removed them, then I can only apologise as well. So with that aside, that crucial point aside, I'll ask you to cast your mind back, if you're a long-term listener of the show, to I believe it was 2020, pandemic time, when I covered The Book of Shanghai, a collection of short stories set in Shanghai or by Shanghai writers, put together in translation by Comma Press, based in Manchester. At that time when I recorded that, I was living in Fife. Now I am actually living in Greater Manchester, and Comma Press have struck again with The Book of Beijing. So in episode 98, this episode, we're looking at 3 stories in the Book of Beijing, which are, in no particular order, Shi Yifeng's Is Mr. Zhang Home, Shu Kun's Dogshit Football, and sci-fi writer, my favourite probably, my favourite of all Chinese authors I think, Han Song's Reunion, which is set in Beijing West Station during Spring Festival, Chinese New Year, which also might remind you of a past episode. The guests for this episode are one of the authors of one of these 3 stories and one of the translators of one of these 3 stories. So Shi Yifeng is here. He's the author of Is Mr. Zhang Home, and so is Carson Ramsdell, who translated that Han Song story. So yeah, 3 years since the Book of Shanghai, now we're on the Book of Beijing. It feels kind of weird, but it feels good to be coming back to this one. It's a very interesting collection. The 3 stories we've picked are somewhat representative of what is in the whole book, and yet we don't really cover the range of stuff that is in every story. I'd love to talk about them, but we're just zooming in on these 3 for this episode, and it was, believe me, there was a bit of it took a little while, shall we say, to figure out which authors or which authors / translators would be able to get on, which stories we'd pick, what would give us a good spread of topics, and indeed genders. So that's enough rambling for this intro. Let's go on now to the news segment, the TrChFic News translated Chinese fiction news. So the first news item, a book that has previously been covered on the show, has won a prize. It's Bai Cha's My Cat Hates Me, translated by Gemma Stafford. Go listen to the episode where I interviewed her. This book has won the Gold Graphic Novel Prize from the IBPA Benjamin Franklin Awards for 2023. So there's a link to that in the show notes. Huge congratulations to the publishers, Brown Books, Bai Cha the author, and of course Gemma the translator. Well done. Okay, second news item. So from a Gemma to a Jenna, the guest from the last episode, Jenna Tang, recently appeared on a Taiwanese English news channel's YouTube. Well, I guess maybe she was on the news channel, but she's definitely on their YouTube, Taiwan Plus. She was there to talk about her translation of First Love Paradise. Fang Siqi's First Love Paradise. So if you listened to the episode I did about that book, interviewing Jenna, and you want more, go jump on the link in the show notes to watch that interview. It's 15 minutes long, and it's in English. And the final news item, this is a very sort of general one. It's about just to say that Chengdu, the science fiction Worldcon hosted in Chengdu has happened. It happened sort of mid-October, I think 18th to 22nd of October 2023. So this is one of the biggest science fiction literature, as opposed to like science fiction movies, the big sci-fi lit convention worldwide, and it got hosted in China, Chengdu, Sichuan province, this year, and seems to have gone well. So quite a lot of people who've been guests on the show were there. It seems like they've had a wonderful time. From what I can tell, looking at all the posts, it was a chance for a lot of Chinese and maybe even diaspora Chinese sci-fi fans to meet up. But then, of course, a big international meetup between those Chinese sci-fi loving fans and all the other sci-fi heads who made the pilgrimage to Chengdu. Not much else to say. I've just linked to a Twitter search for the word Worldcon. So if you're listening to this episode 2 years in the future and you click that link, you'll get nothing to do with Chengdu probably. You'll get wherever it was hosted in the year you're listening. But if you're listening recently, that link will show you a bunch of stuff from the festival. The convention. Still never been to anything like that myself, but it looks like it was a lot of fun for everyone attending. So congratulations to all involved in the organising of the convention. Again, such a general news item, I'm unsure what to say. So let's wrap up the news there and we'll go to the interview. So this is a three-way. It's me, Yifeng, and Carson Ramsdell, the lads. So enjoy our chat, because we had a good time making the chat. Hope you have a good time listening to it. Okay, so on the show, we have Carson Ramsdell and Yifeng here to talk about some stories from the Book of Beijing. Extremely exciting to have you both here. I was wondering if you could each tell the listeners a little bit about yourselves. Now, the fun thing about interviewing two people is it's never easy to know who should answer first. Does anyone want to go first and tell us a bit about yourself?
So,
Yifeng, yeah, please.
Yeah. Everybody, nice to meet you. I was born in Beijing in 1979, and I have been living for this city for over 40 years now. I studied in Peking University, majoring in Chinese literature. After graduation, I worked as an editor at People's Literature Publishing House, a very big publishing house in China, and the magazine Contemporary Dangdai magazine. In that time, my job was reading novels. That sounds perfect for lazy people. Perhaps that's why I started writing novels myself. After writing a few, I become a professional writer. And currently, I'm not in Beijing. I'm in Iowa, the United States, to join an international writing program. I have stayed here for over 2 months. This is probably the longest I have been away from Beijing. It's tough for Beijing folks to leave their city. I'm already starting to feel homesick now.
Yeah, Iowa, I feel that must be a much less exciting place than Beijing.
Yeah, I'm waiting for go back to Beijing.
Fair enough. Yeah, the Iowa workshop, I think, has come up before on the show with other guests, and I know it's got a real sort of history of connection with authors from China. I once proofread a Chinese academic's paper, and it was all about Ding Ling, the author in her later years after, I guess, in the 80s. And I know that I learned through that article that she made, I guess, a quite important, or at least a significant visit to Iowa back then, I think, to the same workshop. So it's
long ago she came to Iowa. Not me.
So Yifeng is here because he's the author of one of the stories in the Book of Beijing, is Mr. Zhang Ho. We'll talk a bit more about the story in a minute, but first I'll get our other guest to introduce himself. It's Carson Ramsdell. Carson, hello. How are you doing, and who are you?
Hey, I'm doing pretty well. So my name is Carson Ramsdell, and I've lived in China for the past, since 2014. So a long time at this point, almost, I guess, we're coming pretty much 9 years here.
Yeah.
And I've lived in Qingdao, I've lived in Changsha, I've lived in Beijing, and I've lived in now Shanghai. So I've lived all over the place. So I started studying Chinese in my undergrad, and I studied for about 1.5 years. There was no Chinese major at my school at that time, I don't believe. It was Temple University in Philadelphia. And so when I graduated, I decided to come to China to continue studying. And a couple years later, I was doing a language program at PKU. So I have also been there, Yifeng, and not, just a language program for 1 year, but still, it's a really wonderful place. And I had an amazing class, two really. One, which was on Chinese and English translation, and another which was on Chinese literature. And that was when I discovered, actually I can read short stories and novels and things, and I just kind of fell in love with it. And so I've been doing translation on and off commercial translation and also some literary translation for, I guess, the past, let's see, since really 2018 or so, or a little bit earlier, for commercial stuff, and then literature a little bit later on. So yeah, that's pretty much my story.
And in the Book of Beijing, you're the translator of a Han Song story called
Reunion.
Home Reunion. I almost said Homecoming. Yeah. That is a different story altogether.
Yeah, we can talk about it a little later on, but we actually reworked the title from the Chinese. So yeah.
And you said you lived in Qingdao. I think in another life, there's a version of me that didn't leave China and relocated there from Shanghai, because that's such a cool city. But
it's an amazing city with the architecture and all of that stuff. It's an amazing city. It's one of my favorite cities to just like walk around and see what's happening.
Yeah, for sure. Okay. It's not a Qingdao podcast, unfortunately, so I should keep us moving forward. So first thing we're going to talk about is Yifeng's story, is Mr. Zhang home. So I have read this one twice because on the first reading, I think I didn't really understand what I was reading. So the basics of the story are we have a young couple. I think a young man and a young woman. The man's narrating, and they're visiting an abandoned compound, and they are going into, I think, the girl's grandparents' abandoned home in that compound, from what I remember. And there's a strange knock on the door from a boy who seems like there might be something supernatural about him. But I'll pass the baton here to Yifeng. What should the listeners know about this story, Yifeng? So before we start talking about like big themes and ideas, what are the basics that the listeners should know?
I'm glad to talk about this short story. This story is written in maybe 10 years ago. Just when I'm younger than now. This is a story, I think, about loneliness and fear. A child played a small trick, but he just wanted someday to accompany him to on a nighttime journey. He was scared, and I believe this is a universal theme. As a child, you always feel scared. When I was a child, I used to play outside every day. But after dark, I wouldn't dare to go upstairs alone. Go down or not to go down. That was always question for me. Of course, the story is set in Beijing. Specifically within a large compound in Beijing. Government or military staff and their families lived in a massive a country yard where anybody knows each other, like a small self-sustained city. When I wrote this story, I set it in a large compound I used to visit often in my childhood. Many of my classmates lived there, but later the people in the compound moved away, leaving behind a deserted place, which becomes the backdrop for the story. Some parts of Beijing may seem cold and even desolate, but in underlying tune is warm. Its underlying tune is warm. That's how I see Beijing, and that's what I want to convey in the story. The city is huge, and the people might feel happiness, but they still have to help each other. That's the I think about the short story. Some people think this story is some kind of a ghost story. No. It's about a human being, just human being.
When you're writing it, did you want to create a kind of ghostly atmosphere, or is that really just an atmosphere of loneliness?
Yeah, of course. The fear in the air, in the walls, more scared people, and the warm becoming in the end the warmer.
Now that you say that, it reminded me a bit of some of my experiences living in China. So I'm from Dundee in Scotland. Dundee is a fairly normal small British or Scottish city. Once you leave the city, you're in the countryside, and you don't have to go very far to leave the city because it's quite small. But just like most of the UK, apart from the really big cities, the population density is a lot lower than most places or most cities in China. So when I would come home from China and would be walking my dog or walking through the shops, it would even if there were people around me, it could feel sometimes a bit lonely because there were so fewer people. Living in even the small town I was in Zhejiang province, and especially living in Shanghai, usually there'd be quite a lot of people around, not crazy crowds, but it was hard to feel alone in that way. So whenever I was in a place in China where I was like the only person in this that I could see, it did feel quite different. Maybe that's my experience as a foreigner, not used to such being around so many people. Maybe it is a little bit more striking to be alone in a place like Beijing, where normally you're the opposite of alone. I don't know if you have any thoughts about that.
In the eastern China and South China, the cities are very crowded, very crowded, and people, I think they don't sleep. They play out a whole night, especially in Changsha, in Guangzhou, and in Zhejiang. They play every day, the whole night. But in northern China, some like even in Beijing, the biggest city in northern China, somewhere and sometime, especially in winter, people don't come out. People don't come out. They stay in their home, and the big city sometimes is empty. It's empty, and you see no people in the street. Very different in China, south and the north.
Yeah, can I just say one thing? I love that Yifeng mentioned Changsha's nightlife because it's 100% true. It's like, for some reason in that city, you can. It's like 3 or 4 in the morning, and you go out and there's people eating snacks. In fact, I'll give one example. There used to be a Shaokao place, and we lived there. We would go out drinking, and Shaokao is like Chinese barbecue. I don't know if there's some listeners that might not know that, right? But we would go out drinking, and we came home. Maybe this was when I was much younger. I cannot do this anymore. It's
I could say as well, for listeners who don't know, Shaokao is usually like kebab barbecue, so it's very convenient. It's not like a American or British garden barbecue. It's a very convenient late night snack.
Yeah. So we would go out and we'd be out there till like 4 or 5 in the morning. But there was a Shaokao place that there's on the door. It had a phone number. When you come, you call the phone number. The man wakes up and he comes out and makes you Shaokao.
Wow.
So it was like Again, that was in my younger days. I cannot do that anymore. But
I wouldn't want to do that to the man.
Yeah, it always felt bad, but I mean, the other thing is that after we weren't the only ones, that's for sure. But after you've had, a few beers, it seems you're a little bit less inhibited. You're like, yeah, okay, I'll call the guy and you can make me Shaokao.
Maybe the main reason the main reason of the difference is weather. Somewhere cold, somewhere warm, and Changsha. I like Changsha. Changsha. Changsha is a city without night. The city without night.
Right, and Beijing is quite far north, so it makes sense it would get properly cold in the winter. I had one other thought about this story, again, from you saying how it's really about loneliness. So I had quite a lot of fun experiences when I lived in China, either accidentally or deliberately going to places that were sort of abandoned. So to give one example, Shanghai has these fake foreign towns in its outskirts where I guess the government or the municipal, yeah, I think the municipal government, the city government wanted to create some interesting residential areas to attract quite wealthy people out of the center to the edges of Shanghai. And they wanted to theme these towns around different countries. So they had there's a famous one, the Thames town, a British town there, but then there are others, Italian town, French, was there French? No, I'm getting mixed up. There wasn't a French one. Swedish town, that was a somewhat successful one. That's terrible that I've forgotten the other ones, but a Dutch one as well. And it was in the Dutch one I visited, and there was a building that looked sort of completely constructed but not filled in. And it was the easiest thing in the world to go in the door, ride up the elevator, and have access to a whole floor that was just concrete and empty, and explore this very strange, creepy place, or yeah, creepy place, and take artistic photos, and with no one trying to stop you. And in this country, if you try to do that, I don't think you would get anywhere. There's a lot more control of these sort of ambiguous places. But I guess that was an experience of visiting somewhere that was still being built, not an experience of visiting somewhere that had been left behind. And the place I visited, I guess, was it was going to be a private home or private business, but the abandoned place is Mr. Zhang home would have been like a government sort of state-owned area. And you said it was based on your childhood. So I was wondering if in Beijing there were or still are these places that were maybe built in the Mao Zedong era, when people were organized much more around things like the military or big government workplaces. Is it sort of about that past era leaving behind places that have been, that took a long time to be knocked down or used for something else? Am I understanding that right?
Maybe in the past era of China, people, people, especially government people and the staff in the government and the military, they work together. They work together, and they lived together. All their family worked and lived together. They know each other in the very big compound, a very huge compound in Beijing. Maybe that's especially in the cities such like Beijing, and but the city is always changing, and some compound there are no people live, and some compound they remain different. They have different fate, and in the story I wrote, I set in a compound. People moved out. People moved out to another place. They continue work, continue live in somewhere in this city, but the old compound live there. Maybe we can change to the compound to the other youth, and maybe move the other people to live in, and in a short time it's empty. It's
right.
empty.
So it's in between.
Yeah. So the two young, the girl and the boy come to the compound to live together for some days. So this is the story, the background.
Okay, interesting. And I had one other question about it. I wanted to ask if your story wanted to explore differences in different generations. because I remember the main characters discuss a bit about how their grandparents used to live there, and I think there's discussion about how things have changed. We have two, I don't know if they're supposed to be in their early 20s or something. So these main characters deal with a little boy who is, I guess, arguably he's the next generation, and he's looking for these different Mr. Zhangs who would be, I guess, the generation above them. So I just wondered if that is also supposed to be an idea you're exploring in the story, different generations and how they're using these places in Beijing in different ways.
Maybe the generation. I don't think the generation is the main theme of the story. Just the kid. The kid. Of course, the kid is the next generation. The grandpa and the grandma is upper generation. But I think the main theme is about human helping each other. The weaker ask people for help, and people help them. That's all. Generation is. I really don't think about the generation problem question in this story. Actually.
Okay, my curiosity is satisfied. So Carson, I get the sense you've seen quite a lot of China. You still live there. Have you been to any places that are sort of abandoned or quiet or curious? Have you been exploring places you perhaps shouldn't have been?
I just want to say one thing to Yifeng first that we can cut out, but your story sounds like it was written for me. It's the kind of themes that I really like to deal with, this kind of loneliness and fear and this kind of atmosphere of kind of, spookiness. To go back. So basically, yeah, I mean, one of the things that I've been thinking about as I've been listening to Yifeng talk is like a lot of these kinds of places that I've been to in Beijing, but in other places in China too. A couple of examples come up. I mean, back when I was much younger, in my 20s, there was this old abandoned kind of like nightclub, quite central in Beijing. And like a nightclub kind of lounge thing that must have at one point had like all kinds of, just various nightlife things, KTV rooms and things like that, pretty much abandoned. And the compound that was in was still kind of open and stuff. So we went in, we kind of were poking around, but yeah, just like seeing all the old stuff in there that was kind of these rooms and these spaces that were in this, and the word that I keep thinking of is this to use kind of cliche is this state of liminality where they are existing on this edge of being in a place that is so populated, right, and so buzzing, and yet these spaces are quiet. And I had the same sense after 2016 when there were some policy changes in the hutongs, and a lot of the old hutongs that were, when I first came to Beijing in 2016, it seemed like every window in the hutongs, someone had a store. Someone was selling something out, right, of their door. They had it open, they had snacks, they had beer, they had everything you could imagine. And then there were some policy changes, and for better or for worse, there's no value judgment there, but it changed. And I remember telling a friend that it just felt kind of, they painted all the hutongs gray and put like gray bricks to make them look like they had maybe used to previously. That was the goal, at least. And a lot of those old stores were kind of taken down or bricked up. That's the word that kind of became common parlance in Beijing, is like the bricking, right? So after that, right, like sometimes even when we were walking in the hutongs, the old places that I used to know in my head that had all these things going on suddenly felt, I guess, Yifeng used a really good word, desolate. And it wasn't truly desolate, right? There were still people living there and stuff, but it wasn't that visible sense of there's people selling things. There's a person sitting on the street playing chess and drinking green tea and smoking cigarettes, and you can go walk, and like it just changed really quickly all of a sudden. And so I think those themes we can continue to explore in a bit here, like with Han Song's story, because it's this rapid pace of development and change. But those are the kinds of things that, kind of came up when I was listening to Yifeng talk about his story, and I really identify with that. Yeah.
This makes for an excellent transition, and I can draw a card from the like 1 or 2 books of philosophy or theory I've read in the last few years. What a card I've pulled on the show before, actually. I think you'll often hear, I was about to say 20 something. I'm not 20 something, I'm 30. So millennial podcasters like to pull a card from the Mark Fisher deck. He was this political thinker, I suppose, who also had quite an interest in film and literature. And his last book, I think, was The Weird and the Eerie, where he was trying to look at this concept of weird literature, weird fiction, weird films, and create his definition of what weird with a capital W is, and also a second category, eerie, the eerie. And the very simplified way to explain the definition of each is they're both these sort of haunting or disturbing or troubling moods. The weird is created by like an overabundance of things that should not be there or should not be together. It's too much. And the eerie is something that is haunting because of its absence. So I guess in Is Mr. Zhang Home, we have an eerie environment that has been depopulated. The things it was created for aren't there, and it creates this lonely, spooky feeling. But then in Han Song's Reunion, we're in another sort of liminal in-between space, a railway station, but it's totally overpopulated. It has got lots of things you might not think a railway station would need. So it's a very weird capital W environment. So I'll pass the baton here. Carson, no pressure. This is only the most pro Han Song podcast on the internet, I think. But what should listeners know about Reunion? My dog was just asking inside, so I will let my dog in. Let you see her.
Yeah.
Hey, buddy.
Buddy.
Hello.
Hello.
There we go.
Is he fully potty trained at this point? He looks young.
So that was the show's producer you just saw.
Okay. So yeah, actually, weirdly enough, lowercase w. I started rereading parts of The Weird and the Eerie in preparation kind of for this podcast, because I was thinking about a lot of those themes.
It's very uncanny that should happen.
Which is the other thing that I was thinking about. So yeah, I mean, kind of at a really simple level, Han Song's Reunion is about, the rapid development that Beijing, but also a ton of other Chinese cities obviously have been through over the past couple decades. And he takes, of course, in this case, the speculative part is he takes Beijing West Railway Station, which is already an enormous place if you've ever been there, and he kind of just runs with that. And again, without kind of giving anything away, I think it's left up to the reader to decide ultimately where that could go, but it has developed into this massive entity, essentially, where it is both one part structure and one part sort of organism that is, dripping with metallic, construction material tumors, and has like full scale security people running around, which is kind of who we're following, to kind of keep things under control. And it's this kind of reimagining of, like you said, something that I guess we're familiar with in this way. This is why I was thinking of the uncanny, because we're familiar with what a train station looks like. We're familiar with what Beijing West looks like. It's already huge and massive, but it's taken to like this next level entirely, where it becomes completely over the top, where it has tendrils and basically tunnels, right? That it's growing out into the suburbs of Beijing. So yeah, that's it. In a nutshell, that's what Han Song's Reunion is about.
I have a really good response to that, but I'm a little worried the dog is doing something silly upstairs, so I'm just going to check on the dog. I'll be really quick. then I'll come back. What are you up to? Okay. Come on. Come on. Come on, Hazel. What's this? There we go. We have a baby gate on the stairs, which I've shut, which means I'll now be able to see her wherever she is. Okay, so to answer my response to that, what you said. So my experience of railway stations in mainland China has been, I have to say, excellent. I love them. But the first one I got really familiar with was Hangzhou East Station. So one of these huge fast rail stations, high-speed rail stations. And I loved how big they were. I loved how many different things you could eat. And I loved when you were upstairs, you could see, if it was a busy day, just a number of people in one place I'd never seen in my life. And I was thinking before, when I was writing the questions, that these are unique environments where, like, you could, if you wanted. Oh, now the dog's asking outside again. Second. You want out? There you go.
犹豫不决.
I think I'll keep that in. Yeah, so I was thinking when I was writing the questions how these high-speed railway stations are almost somewhere you could live, and that they have all these shops and commercial attachments that go beyond just what a train station is. But actually recently, I've been experiencing places that are maybe, although they're much smaller, even more like that in the UK, because I've just been to 2 different conferences for work. And one of them, it was this building basically made for conferences on the outside, in a sort of nowhere space outside of Birmingham, Warwick, actually. We were there for one night. So all through the day, me and my colleagues were being shuttled between meeting rooms. And then we had a meal in the big meeting hall, and then went over to the bar. So had like a night at the pub, drinking pints in this conference center. And then when we were all finished drinking our beer and stuff, went down the hallway to our hotel bedrooms. So it was very weird because they were really not separate at all from like the conference space, the bar space. And then more recently, the more recent conference I was at, it was in Birmingham's National Exhibition Center, which was like, it felt a bit like Shanghai, where like there was a big artificial pond / lake surrounded by like a casino, although Shanghai doesn't have casinos, like a shopping mall, restaurant stacked on top of other restaurants, Starbucks, all these like commercial spaces, and then right next to it, this big area of commerce, and of course, lots of hotels. So if you had enough money, you could live in this totally artificial environment for months. And I felt that like it must have a bit of its own ecosystem. There'll be staff that are there every day. There's vehicles moving in and out, all these moving parts to keep this strange, like, mutant creature with all these different parts attached running. And that, in a way, felt more like Reunion than, I don't know, than it would first appear, because it's not in China, it's not a railway station, but I feel like that artificial nowhere land environment taking on a life of its own and becoming its own sort of society is really powerful. And I guess a lot of sci-fi writers have explored that sort of thing. Maybe J.G. Ballard comes to mind, if only because I've not read enough other authors. But yeah, I think Han Song was exploring that in this story in a really interesting way.
Sure. Yeah, you bring up something, having been to a lot of these kinds of, I guess they're called like exhibition centers or conference centers myself, for like my day job. You bring up something that I think, yeah, is something that I was thinking about a lot with reading and translating this story, having read it probably 100 times at this point. But yeah, something I was thinking about as well, which is this idea that some of these like self-contained, like you said, these ecosystems, right? They're so huge and so massive, and there's so much going on when you're in them, and yet somehow there's still this underlying aura or sense of artifice, and like somehow in their enormity they feel guess desolate might not be the right word, but it's what I can think of right now. They feel lonely in some way, or they
stripped
feel,
down.
yeah,
Austere, is that? No.
austere or stark. There's something missing
Stark.
from it that would make you feel, I guess this was uncanny, right? This is what I
Right.
was kind of wrestling with the story, was kind of like, it is part weird, it's also kind of part uncanny, because it's this thing that you're familiar with, and yet there is something changed, right? And I kind of had that sense reading the story, and I would hope that it came through in the translation. I did try. You know, Hansong, and I could be totally wrong, I haven't read everything from Hansong, but you know, from my sense is that there's this kind of style of this, you know, it's this sort of very dark, gritty, noir, you know, science fiction. And I think this story like really exemplifies that. And, you know, he takes Beijing West Railway Station and he just creates this place where, like, you know, there's people living in like hotels, or just, you know, these kind of like one night cheap motels that you just stay a night or multiple nights if you don't have anywhere else to live, just to try to not be homeless, living from paycheck to paycheck. And, you know, people cooking barbecue, which we just talked about, a little bit of synchronicity there, inside of like these kind of almost streets and neighborhoods that have developed in the station. And yet, I mean, I'm trying to think of what I can say without like making people just be like, oh, okay, I already know everything about the story, I don't want to read it. But like, it's not done developing, right? I think it's kind of up to the reader, like when that stops. But it's, you know, it's continuing. It's still in theory kind of like, or at this time, right? At least it's still in theory kind of growing.
Yifeng, the times when you've had to travel through one of these huge high-speed rail stations in cities like Beijing, what's the experience like for you? And yeah, that's the question.
I travel in Beijing often, usually in the railway, in the railway, in the subway. I like
Right.
I like subway in Beijing. I like it very much. And you know, in Beijing, driving is a disaster. Maybe so many cars in the road, and traffic problem is so big. And but in the subway, I think it's comfortable, and I can read. I like reading on the road. I like reading, read a novel, read some stories when I come out. So I like subway. I don't like drive. I only hope the people in the subway. I only hope them not to play their phones so loud in the subways, because I want to read. This is only one hope for the Beijing subway. The other thing is perfect. I have been to a lot of cities such as New York,
Oh yeah.
and Chicago, and Tokyo, somewhere. I think the subway in Beijing and maybe it's the best subway.
Superior.
Because
Yeah.
because it's new.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing that Han Song is quite famous for writing, well, lots of horror stories or sci-fi horror about transport, but some of them are about the subways in cities like Shanghai, Beijing, and they are like horror stories. I've read some of them in translation. They're like so disturbing and creative. But like my actual experience of riding the real subway system in Shanghai and other Chinese cities is very similar to Yifeng's, pretty excellent, unless you're riding at like 8 a.m. on Monday morning or something, then you're going to be turned into a sausage or a sardine. But yeah, compared with the subway in London, I think you'd think the London subway or the New York subway would be the best place to set out like a horror story. But maybe, I don't know, I think a thing that did strike me is, and I've talked about this on past episodes, but I'll mention it again. A thing I found not scary, but a bit uncanny was how quickly the subways were appearing in China. Like, I visited Qingdao once. It had no subway system. I came back like a year and a half later, and they've got like 3 lines. And I go back to a city, it would double its number of lines. So we were talking about how some of the high-speed rail stations can become these like environments where you could live a whole week in like using hotel rooms, eating, drinking. I remember actually in Shanghai, some of the subway stations had similar stuff underground. They'd be connected with lots of shops, or they'd have lots of cafes and stuff. So yeah, it's an experience you wouldn't get in the London Underground, of just this whole underground commercial, I guess, world. I found it very unique. I don't know if that's something you'll find in other countries' transport systems, but I couldn't call it like horrifying, but definitely it's a very interesting way for an interesting environment for human beings to spend parts of their lives. And even the amount of distance you could walk through like Xujiahui station in Shanghai, you could be traveling for not miles underground, but maybe more than half a mile if you if you got slightly lost.
I think it's Beijing's Xizhimen 地铁 is like real big, and you can walk for a long time.
Yeah. Some stations, subway stations in Beijing is, I really don't know why they are so big. In many times, sometimes you stay in the train, maybe 10 minutes, 20 minutes, but you walk in the station, you have to walk 20 minutes. People in Beijing don't know why. People in Beijing
no, it's good exercise. You don't have to go to the gym if you have the subway station. But no, I mean, I will also say, just as a, it is true, I think, that of all the subways that I've ridden, China, Beijing, Shanghai has, Changsha now, Qingdao has really good subway systems. And it's great because you can go anywhere you want to in the city just by getting on the subway. I mean,
maybe the big station to hold so many people. Maybe I think the people is too many people in the one station. You have to have big enough station to hold these people. Maybe.
Certainly at like Chinese New Year. I forgot, is Reunion, is that set around Chinese New Year?
Yeah, it's set smack dab during Chinese New Year. I mean, I think there's all of these kinds of, I guess I can't think of a better word, but there's always this kind of sense of like critical mass with this story. It's like you're achieving like critical mass of people traveling through the station during Chinese New Year. You're achieving kind of critical mass of like development of the actual station of Beijing West Station in Reunion, right? It's like, it's this enormous station. And so kind of, I don't know, there's that kind of motif running through it. It's not only that the station is kind of developed to this critical mass, but it's also, or this critical point, but it's also that, the story takes place during Chinese New Year, which is, of course, if you've ever been to China during Chinese New Year and you have been in any kind of, the Gaotie stations or the high-speed rail stations or the subway stations or the airports, or like to Yifeng's point, if you try to drive on the highways during that time, it's totally crazy. Another point that you mentioned is kind of these spaces as spaces that we could potentially live in. There have been stories of people, I'm sure you know this, like I think that there's a guy that was in Charles de Gaulle living in the airport for many, many years. And there's another guy actually that lives in Beijing airport. Well, lived, I'm not sure. I think his name was Wei Jianguo. They had a few stories written about him by Xinhua and also by other news outlets as well, I think.
Is the Charles de Gaulle story, is that the one that was adapted into the film with Tom Hanks, The Terminal?
It may be the inspiration for that film. I will have to look it up. But yeah, I do know that it's like, people have lived in these places because you kind of have everything you need.
For sure, provided you've got the money. I thought I'd mention here, I didn't see this confirmed anywhere, but I'm fairly sure I've covered another story on my podcast that would have been in the same competition or collection as this Han Song story. It's called Express to Beijing West Railway Station. I would try to read the Chinese, but there's like a couple characters I don't know. So I would. Oh, what am I talking about? I've got it in pinyin right in front of me. 开往西站的特别列车, and it's by a younger, a female sci-fi writer, a bit younger than Han Song, Mu Ming, and in her story she uses, I think the rules for the competition or collection they were submitting to were it's got to be set in Beijing West Station at Chinese New Year, and she used it to tell a sort of romantic story involving time travel. So I guess looking at how a railway station can be a meeting place and how through high-speed travel we can sort of mess around with time because we can move from one place to another extremely quickly without all the time it would take to, like, I guess, walk it, basically. So it's interesting how something as simple as a railway station, albeit loaded with the significance of Chinese New Year, can be explored in such different ways with such different atmospheres by two different authors, but at the same time be quite true to the experience of using these places. Just thought I'd give credit to Mu Ming there for that one. I'll keep us moving. The next story is another one that appears in the Book of Beijing. It's Dog Shit Football, which I chose partly just for the title, by Shu Kun. Did either I guess Carson, you maybe not read this one. Yifeng, have you read Dog Shit Football?
Of course.
Yeah.
Because I like football too, and this is a famous short story in China about football.
Right.
But the football story in China often be the sad story.
I'm Scottish, so I understand.
Yeah, I want to talk about football. Football is maybe it's a tragic topic, not only for Beijing but for all the Chinese people. We might have the most passionate football fans, but we don't have a good football team.
Yeah. So in Scotland, football is our national sport, just like England, our number one favorite sport. But in England, they have quite a good team nationally, and they have good club teams. In Scotland, we have all the passion, and that's about all we have. We also are pretty bad. Like the big achievement for Scotland will be to qualify for the World Cup. If we qualify for the World Cup, we're doing good. I guess it's just maybe as similar but different, because in Scotland it's the national sport, but we're a small country, so maybe it's okay. China's a huge country, but I guess football is not necessarily the number one sport in China.
But I think people all over all the world like football. They see football important, and I talk about the story. Xu Kun wrote this story maybe a long time ago, and at that time many Chinese people's football hero was Maradona, and now Messi has won the World Cup, but our football team hasn't made any progress. I don't have much to say about Chinese football. It's just sad, very sad story.
When is this story from exactly? Because I think in the Book of Beijing, maybe at the credits page it tells you, but certainly when you're reading the story's translation, it's not dated. So you might wrongly assume they're all news stories. Is this one from before the year 2000, or do you know?
Maybe in the 1990s.
The 90s,
maybe
right?
1990s. Yeah. When I was a child, I heard of the famous story, because 狗日的足球 in Chinese 狗日的足球 dog shit football is maybe the sound of Chinese from our heart. we talk about football. We just say 狗日的.
Okay, I'll remember that one. So yeah, I really enjoyed this story. I thought it was quite funny, but also I found it very relatable. I don't know if it's for the same reason, but like growing up as a boy, I hadn't really realized that it's very hard to have like a, I don't know, a creative, artistic, I guess what in Mandarin, 文艺 side, but also do all the things all the other boys like be obsessed with football. And so as a little boy, like before I was really going to school and stuff, I thought I loved football. I liked talking about it with my dad. I liked to play it. But then when I met other boys who were really into football or went to football games, I found that they were often like quite rude or small-minded or mean. And I found that basically I didn't fit in at all with the crowd. As a teenager, I thought, well, I want to like know my friends well. Even if football is not for me, I want to like make an effort to appreciate the things they enjoy. I shouldn't think I'm special and above my other friends. But like I always found actually I don't enjoy football at all. I really don't enjoy the culture around it. So and now I'm an older an older young man, let's say, I feel quite comfortable to say football is go rude. It's shit. I don't care for it. Forget it. And that's sort of what the journey the main character in this story goes through very quickly, because what is it? Her husband is a huge football fan. She hates it at first. She becomes very invested, and then she learns what the football fans are like. And what is it? They're using. It's interesting. She has the female perspective that they're using. In the translation, I think the word is bitch. Like they're using all these nasty words that would be particularly nasty for a woman in huge numbers in a crowd. And that's where she realizes that, you know, fuck this. This is an awful sport. It's not worth me I shouldn't try to enjoy it, basically. I should just forget it. Yeah, I found that kind of relatable. Even though I've never been a Chinese woman married to a Chinese man, I felt like there was some kind of parallel growing up as a little boy in Scotland, which was a weird surprise. I did not expect that, picking up Book of Beijing.
Mm-hmm. Xukun and we are friends. We often share our opinions on football, and we are fans of Messi. Yes, this in the past World Cup, we often talk about World Cup sometimes, and I think her story is a comedy. It's a comedy, but some like absurd comedy. Some like absurd comedy. And, but football story in China is sad story. Comedy story and sad story together.
Yeah, tragicomedy.
Mixed together. I think that's the story really is. You talk about football. That means sad story to Chinese, but the Xukun wrote in comedy. I like these ways to write.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense to me. I realize we've been going for more than an hour, so I'm going to keep us marching on. We got 3 questions that are sort of in general about Beijing literature. First one, it's God knows how anyone would answer this question. Is it easy to define what Beijing literature is? If you ask me what's Shanghai literature, I would have some ideas. If you ask me what's Beijing literature, I would say, I don't know. So do either of you have a view on what makes a Beijing story a Beijing story. Carson hasn't spoken for a while, so I'll pass this one to him. Perhaps you've got no idea. Perhaps you have an opinion. I think you're on. Well, yeah, you were on.
I want to start off by saying I will defer to Yifeng's opinion on this because he probably has a much better conception of what Beijing literature is than I.
Yes,
yeah,
I think that's fair.
But so for me, I think that's a tough question. I mean, I understand the question, and I think it's an interesting question. I just think that there are so many authors who are so diverse, whether that's like Han Song, whether that's, authors who have since passed, like Shi Tiesheng or Wang Xiaobo or, Yu Hua. Like these people are, Yu Hua is from Beijing, right? Yeah.
Yuhua is in maybe he's not a typical.
Yeah, but I mean, either way, I mean, like I recently I picked up this Wang Xiaobo book that is 寻找无双, and it's like I mean, all of these things, it's like it's taking elements from like classical Chinese culture and this kind of absurdist, almost, I don't want to say like magical realism, but like it's like this kind of absurdist angle, that this bent that Wang Xiaobo is kind of famous for, this funny kind of almost comedic stuff with kind of just commentary. And then I haven't finished the book yet, and then reading that alongside of some other things like Li Hongwei's some short stories recently. I think the one that I was reading was called 冰淇淋皇帝, which is really cool short story. It's a great short story. I love it. It's so cool. And it's like too easy to spoil, so I just won't say anything, but it's a really cool short story. They're just all so different, right? Like, and the kind of elements that the authors work into their stories, I think you'd be really hard pressed, I guess, for me, and it might be because I just don't know enough, because I don't have enough time to read all the stories, or books, but to say what exactly is Beijing literature. So that was a totally PR answer. I'm sorry for that because I said nothing, but yeah.
That's all right. The fourth person on the call, Carson's PR manager, is nodding approvingly. So yeah. I Googled, by the way, because I wanted to know myself where you was from. He's born in Hangzhou, I should say, and his formative years were in Haiyan County, which is apparently under the administration of Jiaxing City in Zhejiang.
He lived in Beijing for a long time.
Right.
In China, many writers live in Beijing.
Yeah.
Because Beijing is culture center.
That's it, and it's the capital as well. I was going to say more. The dog was at the door. I will just let the dog inside. Okay. Yeah, I was thinking there must be a lot of authors who've been in Beijing, done their writing, if only because it's the capital, and maybe even if they set the story in Beijing, the fact that it's Beijing is not so important, or maybe it's not capturing the spirit of the city. But then you maybe have other stories by authors who are trying to, or either they're deliberately trying, or just because it's what they wrote, it would be a very, very Beijing story. And I guess in the Book of Beijing, maybe it's a bit of both, but maybe, I hope a lot of them would have some of the flavor of the city. Anyway, Yifeng, you're obviously the guy on the call to ask, do you think there is such a thing as Beijing literature? And if you do think Beijing literature is something, then how would you describe it?
Maybe in a narrow sense, literature writing in Beijing. In Beijing, dialect is Beijing literature. The people in Beijing talk specially, but today dialects have come less important.
Right.
I think literature about this city is the literature about this city, Beijing, I think is Beijing literature. Today, Beijing is a huge immigrant city, and with nearly 30 million people live here. How many Beijing people live here? Beijing people, who is immigrant people. I don't know. The city is changing, and the literature is changing. Unchanging literature only exists in fantasies. So I think now in nowadays, a story about Beijing is Beijing literature.
Good answer. So then we covered 3 stories in this episode. We had your story, Yifeng, is Mr. Zhang Home. We had Han Song's reunion, and we talked a little bit about Shu Kun's dogshit football. So like, I want to ask, how much is each of them a Beijing story? So Yifeng, we did your story first. Were you trying to write a Beijing story with is Mr. Zhang Home?
Of course. My story is a part of Beijing literature's tradition, I want to expand the tradition of Beijing literature. In the time of Lao She, Beijing is still essentially the capital of a feudal empire, an ancient city. The lives of Beijing residents in that time look like folklore samples. Of course, today Beijing residents couldn't live in that way. Writing about today's life is the most important attribution the writer make, I think. So I write the new Beijing story. I think this is an important work of me.
Awesome. Okay, and the next story we talked about was Han Song's reunion. Carson, do you think that is Beijing crucial to that story, or could you transplant that to like Han Song's native Chongqing? I think that's where he's from, or like Shanghai Hongqiao Station. Could it be any of those, or does it have to be Beijing? What do you think?
So going off of Yifeng's very good definition, then Reunion is definitely a Beijing literature story. I guess it's a Beijing story. It's about Beijing, right? It takes place in Beijing West. And I guess obviously, I mean, you'd have to ask Han Song this question to get like a perfect answer. But my sense is that Beijing has a very particular and palpable feel to it, whether that's the roads or the architecture, this very kind of this old school kind of Soviet architecture, these big buildings, big blocks, and that lends itself to creating an atmosphere for a story like reunion, excuse me, and for kind of imagining how Beijing West railway station could potentially grow and develop out to, he mentions, Mantogo in the story, like, because you get this sense being there and living there for, I mean, I lived there for I think 7 years. Don't quote me on that. But I lived there for a long time, and although Changsha and Shanghai, they're also developing, these are quickly developing places as well, but when you're there, the feel of those cities is totally different. And when you're in Beijing, sometimes I think it has a very unique and distinct way of making you feel super tiny because it's so huge. So yeah, there's actually a really interesting article that my friend sent me the other day on WeChat, which I can't think of the title right now, but basically it made the comparison between Beijing and other cities, and this is a really broad brushstroke, but as Beijing having huge, wide avenues and big like compounds, which was, I think, 大陆书网, and Shanghai and other cities as having kind of these smaller streets and more organic, and that was 宅路密网. And so it's not like a perfect comparison. I mean, it obviously, there's different places in Beijing. You know, there's the hutongs, but I think on a very broad basis, you know, when you read, I was reading the article and I thought, well, there's something kind of here. And I think that sense of just sheer size in Beijing lends itself to this feeling that
Everything's bigger in Texas.
Yeah, exactly. Everything's bigger in Texas. Everything's bigger in Beijing. Yeah.
I was going to say
So,
a thing
yeah.
that I liked about the Beijing West story is that it names a real place. And because I know in like some of the crime fiction we looked at for this podcast, it's set in, the author intended it to be maybe be set in a real Chinese city, but then they'll change it to like H city or X city instead of Hangzhou or something. And I think fiction that talks about a real place, especially a specific real place, and then makes it fantastical or magical or science fictional, is very, very fun. Because as a reader, you could potentially go to that real place, or you could, if you've been to it before, you can go back in your memory, and then you can compare the real present version with that fictional version. Like I got a story selected by a magazine. They're going to publish it in March next year, and I deliberately set it in a place. Thank you. Carson is clapping. I am not just mentioning this to try and impress people, but because it's to this point I'm trying to make. I deliberately set it in this place called the Dichty Den in Dundee, where I'm from, which is a beautiful nature area that is, if the Dichty is a river, very small river that goes through Dundee. And the Den is this sort of kind of like a little valley area that has an amazing old bridge over it. And you can walk along the river in all sorts of different directions. The paths, some of them are high up, some of them are low. It's a bit like a Chinese garden, accidentally, in that it's like the paths meander, or I don't know, it feels kind of strangely fragmented that you can go one way and end up coming out an exit you didn't plan to come out. And I tried to write like a weird fiction story where people it becomes a bit like a maze without people realizing. And I based it off the experience of being there in that real place. And if a reader Googles it, they will find it's a real place in Dundee. They could then visit Dundee, being the city I'm from, and then they could visit this real place. But of course, the real place is not magical. It is not actually a maze. It's not got mysterious ghosts in it. But it's the magic of fiction, that you can have this meta version of the real place that takes the real elements and tries to do something artistic with them. And I guess, yeah, Han Song did that with this real station that anyone who is a Chinese citizen or can get a Chinese visa can go see, which I think is cool. Okay, we got a couple more questions one more question, I think, about Beijing literature, and that's, where's it going today? And does it have like domestic rivals? So Carson is broadcasting from Shanghai. I'm curious, maybe Yifeng, you have an idea about this. I know that right now in China, I've heard online that there's a Dongbei Renaissance. People are very interested in stuff coming from Northeast China, Manchuria. I wondered, is Dongbei the coolest place for TV shows and fiction right now? Is Beijing the coolest place? Like, what's the situation, in your opinion?
In my opinion, I like, of course, I like Beijing. I like Beijing, and but I like the Dongbei writers' story. Their works are they can write something I can't write. They can write something I can't write. I like such as Banyu, such as 双雪涛, such as Yang Zhihan. But Yang Zhihan lives in Hangzhou now. I like their stories about Dongbei. In Beijing, Beijing people's personality is some way near to Dongbei people's personality. We are North people. Northern people, we like talk funny. We like jokes. We some way we talk together. Talk in the same way. But with southern people in China, like Shanghai, when they speak Shanghai Chinese, Shanghai dialect. I can understand. I can understand. So maybe I like Dongbei literature the same way. But I think the coolest literature, the coolest city in China, of course, Beijing for me.
What about districts in Beijing? Do you think there is a most cool district like Chaoyang or something?
I live in Haidian. I live in Haidian, and the different place in Beijing like a different city. Because it's too big, it's too huge. Haidian is like a city full of colleges, some scientist companies such like this, and Chaoyang full of restaurant, shops, and the people in Chaoyang. I think they drink whole day, they eat whole day, they watch movies whole day, and people in Haidian is very busy. Very busy. They work hard, and in Carson talk about mental goal. Mental goal is mountain. I think it's full of mountain, and a few people in mental goal. You in mental goal mountain. You can't see a lot of people, or you just climb. You just practice yourself. Fresh air in mental goal. So the different place in Beijing, I think, like different city, really different city, and my favorite place is Haidian. I like Haidian because I study in Haidian. I live in Haidian. I started in Haidian, and I like the some way. I think people work hard. It's good. It's good.
I think that's appropriate that everyone in Chaoyang is consuming the entertainment, but you're the writer. You've got to produce and work to give to create the entertainment. So it makes sense. I'll keep us moving still. Because time is always moving forward. We're getting to the miscellaneous section now. The first thing we do in the miscellaneous section is come up with a word of the day. So a Chinese word of the day that fits the episode. That's a particularly difficult challenge this time because we got 3 stories. But does anyone have a word they'd like to put forward? Because my only clever idea is to suggest Beijing as the word for the day, but that's so lazy. Does anyone have any better idea?
Sorry.
All right, I will ask that in a more simple way. So if you could think of any Chinese word that fits the stories we did today. Yeah.
A Chinese word. I think I like the word fùzá, complexity. Fùzá.
Okay.
I think the word of this is complexity, fùzá, because small towns have a simple beauty, because they have only one face, and big cities have many faces. Maybe the biggest characteristic of Beijing is complexity, and our era is complex, and many things can't easier to define it as right or wrong, and society is complex. And maybe our literature should reflect this complexity of our time. I think so. I like the word fùzá, complexity.
I think that's perfect. And it's maybe a nice thing. Maybe not. It's obvious for all of us, but I think one of the things I really want to counter, to work against in this podcast, is the idea you get in the west of China being this very uniform place where everyone is supposed to be the same, like a monoculture. And if anyone has spent any amount of time in China, especially in a city like Beijing, they'll realize it's not some place where everything is monotonous and the same. It's very lively, very complex, very diverse. It's maybe not the same kind of diversity that we think of with that word here in the UK or in a Western country, or like, but where usually diverse just equals having a multicultural population made up of lots of international immigrants. Really, diversity and complexity can take on lots of forms, and yeah, you can totally see it in a place like Beijing. Carson, did you have any kind of word, or are you happy to just put your vote behind complexity as well? Oh, you're on mute.
I put my vote on complexity, and I'll add one, which is zhuàngměi, which means it kind of just. I mean, I guess the translation is like magnificent or like yeah, like, but it describes these huge big things that are also super kind of, I don't know, like awe-inspiring in some kind of way. It kind of describes that kind of huge thing that is like magnificent and splendid and grand. And there's a better word that I'm trying to think of to translate it, but I can't think of it right now. But yeah,
Sublime.
What's that?
Sublime.
Sublime. Yeah, you could use that. Yeah, it gets around that kind of idea. Yeah. But yeah, I that would be like one that I might add to it. But I think pretty much fùzá is a great one. I mean, yeah, I guess we talked about everything from Beijing to a bunch of other cities, and Beijing itself is incredibly complex, and you know, China is immensely complex. Like each of these places that we've mentioned have just totally different personalities, and then each of those places in turn, you know, you can just peel back the layers of kind of different things that are going on and the different faces of them. So it's a great word to end this off on.
Totally. Okay, next miscellaneous question, and a harder one, I think. It's music that you'd pair with, well, I guess a story or all the stories in this episode. I can see, Carson, you've got one in the notes document. Excellent, full marks for you. And I can see it's called Drone Work 2 for Ratax, I think. So what is this?
Okay, so this is it's called Drone Work 2 for Rata or Rata. Not actually sure how to say that.
Rata, right,
but
okay.
It's by an artist, experimental music artist called Li Weisi, who is from Beijing, fittingly. And because when I'm translating, I cannot have any kind of overstimulating sounds. Like lyrics are totally out of the question. Orchestral pieces oftentimes that are not just like very minimalist or drone-like are also out of the question. So anything, you know, any kind of music that's just too complicated,
too complex, too magnificent, you might say.
Exactly, too magnificent, too intense are yeah. So I kind of end up listening to kind of like drone, I guess you would call it. Some people would call it noise, whatever you want to call it. This is one of the things that I was kind of listening to, you know, during translating the story. So yeah, and I think it adds to the atmosphere of Beijing West Station as portrayed in Han Song's story.
Okay, and Yifeng, do you have any song you would pair either with your story or with the others?
Maybe, of course, we love 崔健，崔健Greenhouse Girl。
你带我走进你的画法，我无法逃脱画的迷霞，我不知不觉忘记了，哦，放下。你说我世上最坚强，我说你世上最善良，我不知不觉已和花。
哒啦哒哒哒哒哒。Da, da, 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 da. That's I think that's the music for Beijing.
Why that song specifically?
Because TrChFic is a Beijing people, and he has the tune of Beijing. He has his music has the tune of Beijing. We heard of TrChFic's music and we thought of Beijing, and in his music, the personality of Beijing showed up. Sometimes tough, sometimes gentle, sometimes cold, sometimes warm, sometimes beautiful, sometimes maybe coward. Like I said, just very complex. Personality of Beijing. I think I can heard from TrChFic's music.
Right, a rich emotional landscape. That's I guess any good city should have one of those. My own musical choice is basically a comedy one. I've basically picked it to go with Dogshit Football. It's 100 Gex Stupid Horse.
Pick it up! Bet my money on a stupid horse, I lost that. So I ran out to the track to get my cash back. I just gotta leave this place with a big bag. So I found a fucking jockey and I grabbed that. Pushed him down to the ground and I punched him in his face. Yeah, I stole his phone, I put him in his place. Me and the horse, we ran out of the place. Then we took my horse back to my place. Stupid horse, I just fell out of the Porsche. Lost the money in my bank account, oh no. Stupid horse, I just fell out of the Porsche. Lost the money in my bank account, oh no. Stupid horse, I just fell out of the Porsche. Lost the money in my bank account, oh no. Stupid horse, I just fell out of the Porsche. Lost the money in my bank account. Woo!
This is a song narrated by someone who decided to put a bunch of money on a racing horse, lost all of the money, decided the horse was a stupid horse, and I think violently assaults the jockey, the horse rider, and it's completely stupid, completely over the top. So maybe it's a bit too over the top for Dogshit Football, which is at least set in something resembling reality. I feel like everything 100 Gex does is in more like a weird hyper reality techno world, which would give the story some affinity with Han Song's work. So 30 seconds or more of the song will have played in the episode by this point. I apologize to the listeners, apart from the minority of strange people that really enjoyed that. I see you're giggling, Carson. Are you familiar with the work of 100 Gex?
I'm familiar with the work of 100 Gex. I forget what it was. It was sometime also around the time I was translating the story. I was watching their Boiler Room set, but also Stupid Horse is that the name of the song? Yeah, it's a
got me through the pandemic. Yeah, it really did. Okay, next question. This is for the show's Patreon, so I will be snipping this one out of the main episode. Listeners will hear a few seconds of and if you want to hear the answer to this question, it's over on patreon.com/TrChFic, TrChFic. Again, another impossible question. Who's the most Beijing author ever? I guess, Yifeng, you might not wish to answer this one, or maybe you have a view. Who do you think is the most Beijing author? I will end the bonus question there and take us to the final section, the further reading questions. So if readers enjoy the stories we talked about, Yifeng's story, Han Song's story, or indeed Dogshit Football, where would we send them? Obviously, this is a tricky question because these are three quite different stories. I would certainly say there's quite a lot of other Hansong available in English translation now. So like if readers, you can't read Chinese, but you can read English, you're certainly not stuck for Hansong. There's a lot you can get, although sometimes it's in collections with other modern Chinese sci-fi writers, but they're all pretty strong generally. Yifeng, if a reader read your story and enjoyed it, who do you think you are similar to that you would direct them to? That some authors might not want to answer that question, but do you have any thoughts, like what writers are similar to you?
Maybe Lao She, maybe Lao She and Wang Shuo
Okay.
Because the dialect of Mai and Lao She is we have the same dialect, and maybe have I and Wang Shuo have the similar background, just compound from compound. From Western in Beijing, you know, in Beijing, Western place and Eastern place is different. We from the Western, maybe Lao She and Wang Shuo. But I wanna emphasize we read about different time. Maybe a few decades apart of us.
Cool. Yeah, and time changes everything. There's no way to stop it. Carson, would you send readers to any similar style writers based on the 3 stories we've talked about? Tricky one. I have another answer in my head I'm thinking of, if you're stuck.
You go first. I'm gonna
Okay.
think.
Right, fair. Yeah, I mentioned J.G. Ballard earlier, and I could have said it doesn't have to be Chinese literature. I think I've read quite a lot of his stories, and I think the way he writes about artificial environments is a little bit reminiscent of Reunion. His novel Crash, I think you could put next to one of Hansong's many stories about transport, and your head could go to similar places where I guess at the time of Crash, Britain's car ownership was becoming universal. Bigger and bigger motorways were being built, and he decided to explore like insane psychological responses to it, where it got mixed up with like human desires. And that doesn't seem totally different from some places where Hansong takes his stories. And I know he likes J.G. Ballard because I asked him in a Zoom call with the London Chinese Sci-Fi Book Club, and I don't know how much he had to say, but certainly I saw the eyes light up at the mention of J.G. Ballard. And J.G. Ballard is himself a great writer, and he has his own connection with China through Shanghai. So yeah, I would always point to him just for a good read, and not just for that one Empire of the Sun, the one set in China, but any of his sci-fi. I think you can find connections with at least Hansong, and any like messed up, scary science fictional urban stories. So yeah, that's what I had in my head. Carson, did that buy you enough time?
Yeah. So I mean, recently I've been kind of reading some of a huge compendium of Ray Bradbury's short stories, and I think it kind of reminded me of like just a lot of them are maybe not as dark and gritty. Some of them are quite dark, very dark, but maybe not as dark and gritty as Hansong's. But there is this sort of weirdness to them oftentimes that I think resonates at least with some of Hansong's work. And the other one that I've been reading through, like I mentioned recently, is if you read Chinese. Unfortunately, I don't think there's much translated into English. But is the author that I mentioned previously is Li Hongwei, who I think has some really interesting and cool, just really fun and interesting stories. Who I also, I think I was introduced to him through doing some of the translation for this. Is that I also read a story of his. But yeah, he has some really interesting stories. Like I mentioned, the one Bing Qilin Huangdi is short, and it's a really fun read if you like kind of absurd, weird, speculative fiction.
Qilin Huangdi, is that something like Ice Cream Yellow Earth?
The Ice Cream Emperor.
The ice cream. Oh, right.
I am not sure, but so there is a poem called The Ice Cream Emperor by, I'm really bad with names if you haven't been able to tell, but by a famous poet who I can't think of the name of. But anyway, yeah, I don't know if it's a reference to that directly, because this kind of Ice Cream Emperor has come up in other works of literature and other, allusions over the years. But this one in particular, as far as I read the original poem, it takes things in a totally different direction, apocalyptic direction. So it's pretty fun.
When I hear Bing Qiling now, I just think of that meme of John Cena saying it over and over and over. I hope some listeners know what I'm talking about. And also when I hear Bing Qiling, I have happy memories of ordering a special green-blue color ice cream at the Family Marts in Shanghai. Very happy memories. It was delicious. I couldn't remember what the flavor's name was anymore. Anyway, very final question. Do either of you have your own work or place online or something that you would like to promote before I wave goodbye to you both?
I'm writing a novel about contemporary life on the internet, where an ordinary people becomes incredibly famous for some little reason, and almost destroy his life. So he tried everything to go to a place where no one knows him, but that place doesn't exist in the real world. This is an absurd comedy, maybe, but it really happens in China today.
Right.
I'm writing such a novel.
That's interesting. I guess there's some similar theme with Is Mr. Zhang Home, because in that story, loneliness is this scary, eerie thing, but then this is a guy who wants to get loneliness.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Maybe in some way he wanna escape from his real world. Escape from his city. Escape from his famous life, but he can't, just like that.
Sometimes I want to escape from reality. Just imagine that nothing exists outside my house. Maybe I got a little bit addicted to that during lockdown. Carson, what about yourself? Do you have any other translations in the proverbial pocket?
Not at the moment. I mean, yeah, but I mean, you could also check out Book of Beijing. I have another story in there, and I am planning on kind of trying to do some more translations moving forward, just because I just haven't had that much time the past couple of years with the pandemic and everything. But yeah, I would like to start up again. So hopefully you will see some more of those, because I would actually like to kind of bring some of these authors that maybe are under translated, like you mentioned, like Wang Jiabo, or even like Li Hongyan, who I've repeatedly mentioned now, but a little bit of extra readership in the English world, because I think they have some really amazing works that just no one's seen.
Yeah, I hope you don't have to get lost in the maze of translation rights. I wonder if that's why Wang Xiaobo was sort of not reaching other language. At least I don't know about other languages, but reaching English.
I don't know if it's like how okay it is to talk about this, but I mean, I have tried to reach out previously to like certain people and just finding like emails and contacts and emailing, and then there's no answer back because maybe that email has been used in X number of years. It's tough to track people down.
Liu Cixin wrote about this in his Dark Forest, right? It's the Dark Forest universe of contacts, email addresses, and legal rights. On that dark note, I'll say thank you both very much for taking the time to talk about these stories. It was a lot of fun, and I'm sure the listeners will enjoy listening.
Thanks for having us. It was a fantastic experience.
And that is the end of the episode. I had a very fun time speaking to my two guests. It's always nice to do these group ones. I think we'll be having at least one more, possibly even 2 more of those before we hit episode 100 and the show goes on hiatus. Just reminder, if you haven't heard me announce this in the last few episodes, yeah, when we hit episode 100, that's it. I'm going off to do other things with my free time, at least for a while, probably quite a while. But the show's feed will stay up, of course. The show's Patreon, I think I'm going to keep up, but I'm going to pause payment collection. So I don't know if I should really be plugging it at this point, but it is there. There's loads of bonus shows up there. And of course you can follow the show on social media. Again, promoting it feels a little moot. I can say I did notice in my show notes template, the links to Twitter and Discord were completely broken. Like the Twitter one just went to http:// and then the word Twitter. So that's no use. And the Discord invite link wasn't there either. So if you're listening and you clicked a dead link on one of those in the last few months, well, it's very embarrassing and I'm sorry. Don't think there's much else I can say. Of course, I usually tell you listeners to recommend the show to other people and before I finish it, and actually I will do that with no hesitation, because when I put the show on hiatus, the feed will stay up. I'll bet loads of you listening have not listened to every episode, and I'll bet there's loads of I'll bet 99% of the people in your life have not listened to the show, and I will bet 1% of that 99% might enjoy it if they're bookish, or if they're bookish people, if they're somewhat interested in literary translation or indeed anything Chinese, then maybe there's something there for them. So okay, let's end the show in the traditional manner. So the best thing you can do for the show, you should know by now, it's to tell another human being. Tell your friend, tell your teacher, tell the high-speed railway station warden who's hunting you down, tell your layabout husband who's constantly watching football in the 90s on his Beijing sofa cheering on Maradona, and tell the spooky kid that keeps showing up at your door asking, 张先生在家吗? Is Mr. Zhang home? And on that haunted note, because I'm recording this the day before Halloween, I will bid you 再见.再见，我开了牙科。